Thank you, Dr. Linton. So our next presenter earned her PhD in plant pathology from the University of Georgia. She is an associate professor 5 at the Institute of Biology, University of the Philippines, Diliman. She will present her research on comparative genomics of host-specialized populations of Cordyspora aceticola causing target spot epidemics in the southern United States. Let us all welcome Dr. Leilani S. Cajones.
Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about, well, my talent, but in particular, the fungal plant pathogen Cordyspora aceticola and its emergence, in particular the use of comparative genomics analysis. Well, this happened in the southeastern United States. An overview of the impacts and the prospects of this work will also be shown towards the end of my presentation as a perspective in the Philippines. So emerging diseases that are caused by fungi are a constant threat to global health and food security. Many of these diseases have caused die-offs and extinctions of wild species, as well as severe reductions in the yield of economically important crops. A very good example is in the emergence of the wheat stem rust fungus called ALG99, can overcome host resistance to most wheat cultivars and is now a global threat to food security. Another is the laurel wilt, which has killed millions of bay laurels and has thought to have been introduced from Asia, and is now affecting the avocado production wherever it is grown. And so in plant pathology, a disease is said to be emerging if there is an increase in host range, geographic range, or incidence. Or it could also be the evolution of a new or more aggressive strain, or for instance, pathogens that have already become resistant to certain fungicides. Now so in cases where plant pathogens adapt to different host species, some of them result into population genetic subdivisions, which we also call as host specialized. And they do this in order to maintain diversity to help evade extinction. And so some of this do this through the production of host-selective toxins, which I'm going to get into the subsequent slide. And then some via the acquisition of conditionally dispensable chromosomes that carry genes for pathogenicity and virulence. And in some cases, this is a result of restricted gene flow due to reproductive isolation. And in necrotrophic fungi, host specialization is most likely due to the production of host-selective toxins. And these are also synonymous to what we call as necrotrophic effectors. So these are low molecular weight secondary metabolites that are secreted by the pathogen to kill the host instantly. And so a very good example, which was also mentioned earlier, was the Bipolaris matis. And so Bipolaris matis is known to be the causal organism for the southern corn leaf blight. And so in this fungus, or in particular the raised tea of this fungus, is known to be more aggressive when the male sterile form was introduced. And this was more aggressive because of the production of what we call as T toxin, which was absent in the previously known race O. And so Cordyspora aceticola is a ubiquitous fungus that is also necrotrophic fungal plant pathogen, commonly found in the tropical and subtropical regions, and that they also have a wide host range. Now, the most studied disease is what we call as the Cordyspora leaf fall of rubber, which has been causing massive devastations in rubber trees, as shown in the images here. So major incidences of this disease have been reported in Southeastern Asian countries, including Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. And in the recent years, this has been found to cause emerging target spot epidemics in another southeastern region in the United States. And that they have been affecting many economically important crops, including tomato, soybean, and cotton. And in the recent work of the population biology of Cordyspora aceticola, the populations, or at least those that are causing emerging epidemics in the region, have been characterized as caused by 3 genetically distinct populations, as shown in this phylogenetic tree, where isolates tend to group based on the host of origin of the isolates. And so further tests of the host range of these isolates have also supported this genetic clustering, where isolates tend to be more aggressive when they were inoculated to the same host as their host of origin, suggesting host specialization. At the time, the underlying genetic basis of host specialization have not yet been characterized. But one important aspect in Crinaspora crassicula is that the symptoms they induce would suggest toxin involvement, as have been observed in rubber as well as in cotton. And so what they do is that the characteristic symptoms include necrotic lesions with yellow margins and a premature leaf drop or premature defoliation, as shown in the images here. Now, in a study by Delamotte et al. In France, have identified the toxin that have been involved or associated with the symptoms in Crinaspora crassicula in rubber trees. This was later called cassicolin, and cassicolin was identified as a necrotrophic effector that are secreted by the pathogen, and it's a very important determinant for pathogenicity, as shown in the images here when the rubber leaves were inoculated with the filtrates of these isolates. This was later found to be encoded by Cas1 gene, and in a subsequent study, there were actually 6 variants of these Cas genes identified here or recognized here as Cas1 through Cas6 in this phylogenetic tree. Now, what else do we get from this tree? So the clusters or isolates have clustered based on their aggressiveness. And what that means is that on a particular group, for example, those that have clustered in group 1 are more closely related to each other, and that they're more aggressive on a particular rubber cultivar than those that have Cas2 and so on. However, some isolates did not show any of these Cas genes and yet have provided or have produced symptoms that would still cause disease in rubber, indicating the existence of another necrotrophic effector that might have to be or that are yet to be characterized. Now, looking into the aspect of other possible mechanisms for the observed host specialization in Crinaspora crassicula is maybe it's via the reproductive isolation or as a result of restricted gene flow. And so in Crinaspora crassicula, the reproduction has long been known as asexual by the conidia as shown in the image on the right. And no sexual structure has been observed in nature, and that the life cycle is poorly understood. And so, in additional works on the population biology of the pathogen, shown here in this minimum spanning network, the populations are just really clonal, as indicated here in the image, where looks in the network would suggest a clonal or sexual recombination. However, there was none recognized or detected, indicating strong evidence for clonality. But in other studies, known asexual fungi are known to have or to undergo cryptid sexual reproduction, which in this form they have a mating type regulatory gene for successful reproduction. And so in this cryptic sexual reproduction, there is controlled by what we call as a man, with 2 mating type alleles, and expected mating depends on if the fungus is heterophilic or homophilic, with heterophilic being self-incompatible, and then homophilic being self-compatible. And so in this study, I conducted comparative genomics analysis to 1, identify the variation of putative necrotrophic effector genes, and then 2, determine if lack of one of the mating types would help explain the clonality that has been observed in Crinaspora crassicula and eventual emergence in the southeastern United States. So to accomplish 12 full genomes of Crinaspora crassicula were sequenced, and each of these were then assembled de novo using Spades assembler. They were then scanned to search for Cas, Tox, and other vector-encoding genes. And so this table summarizes the assembled genomes with quality assessments indicated here, where I performed Tusco analysis to determine genome completeness via the expected gene content. And what I would like to focus on is on this phylogenetic tree, which is similar to the ones I've shown earlier with the Cas genes, or the different Cas variants. And what I would like you to focus on is those highlighted in blue and green, as they represent those that I've sequenced in this study. So for those isolates from cotton, they were all shown to have both Cas2 and an unknown or at least a new Cas variant, which I've indicated here as Cas7, closely related to Cas1, but they're different. Some of the soybean isolates in green have either Cas2 or Cas6, and in an instance with SSTA1, for example here, they both have Cas2 and Cas6, similar to those of the cob isolate from Brazil. Interestingly, we didn't find any of the Cas3, 4, and 5, and that none of these Cas genes were present in all of the tomato isolates. So using ANKI/SMASH and subsequent blast analysis, I've also looked into other possible secondary metabolites in these genomes, and an interesting find was detecting the T-toxin encoding genes, which is found in Bipolaris mavis raised T. And so just to illustrate that here in this schematic diagram, you have 9 genes that are required for the T-toxin. And all of these were found in all of the Cornespora crassicola genomes, and that they have high genetic similarity with the T-toxin encoding genes. What's interesting also is that for Bipolaris mavis raised T, they are distributed into 2 unlinked loci. However, for Cornespora crassicola, they were all located in the same locus as indicated right over here. Other secondary metabolites that was also found are the following, which can be further explored for their potential roles in host specialization. In particular, for example, you may recognize zearalenone, which is a known mycotoxin produced by another fungus, Fusarium bramidearum, and in some instances, Fusarium verticilloides. Now, looking at the mating type locus, what you're seeing here is how I've detected the mating type locus as an indication for the primitive sexual reproduction in Cornespora crassicola. And so just a reference here, you have Bipolaris mavis, which is a close relative for the Cornespora crassicola, and that they are heterophalic. So that means they have either MAT11 or MAT12 in their allele. And what I found is that for Cornespora crassicola, all of the common isolates have only MAT11, whereas all of the soybean isolates have only MAT12. Interestingly, for the tomato isolates, is that they also have either MAT11 or MAT12. And so to conclude, the in silico identification of the Cas, the T-toxin encoding genes, may not directly provide evidence or elucidation for the observed host specialization, but can be further explored for their evolution. Why are they in Cornespora crassicola? And in the Cornespora crassicola being heterophalic, but the absence of both mating types, especially within each of the populations from cotton and soybean may help explain the clonality. And so further study are recommended, including confirming the presence of these genes, and of course for identifying fast-evolving genes. And so this work was part of my PhD dissertation at the University of Georgia. And you may wonder, what are we going to do with this information here in the country? And so when I joined the Institute of Biology, I have been leading projects on the emergence of not a host specialized population, but in fact those that are causing emerging those that are resistant to certain fungicides. And this in particular is in collaboration with the Benguet State University, Nucleus Baños, and is funded by the U.S. Department. And so in this work, we've been focused on developing a diagnostic or molecular diagnostic tool to help with identifying or detecting fungicide-resistant isolates. And so this will provide guidance for the use of chemicals to effectively manage problems, particularly those that already has resistant populations to certain fungicides. And talking about emerging diseases, I did not bring this here, but there's new problem occurring in the country, particularly affecting the strawberry and the rubber industries in the country. And what's interesting is that they are both epidemics are caused by the same genus called Neopestalotiopsis. And symptoms are also very similar, but they are of different hosts, and that they are also from distant locations when they have occurred. And what I would also like to point out is that this occurrences, particularly for the rubber, is occurring in Mindanao, where most of the production of rubber is occurring, and then strawberry in the Benguet or in the Cordilleras, where most of our production is, or where it is. And so this actually is a project that has recently been approved for funding support from MRCP. And we hope to identify the ongoing epidemics that are already occurring in these geographic regions. Now, to wrap it up, these research endeavors, particularly those that I've mentioned, emphasize the need for consistent monitoring and detection, and in particular with effective tools, in anticipation of emerging diseases that could be occurring in the future. I strongly believe that there will be future occurrences, especially because an agricultural crop production system is a constant battlefield where the interactions between the pathogen, the host, and then you have the environment, where they are characterized as an evolutionary arms race, where emerging diseases could arise from any time in the future. And of course, in this time though, we are better equipped, so our response will become more efficient now that we have not just the knowledge, but the tools to help mitigate potential losses. And in particular, helping our farmers with their science-based decision-making process to the integrated crop management for not only vegetable and strawberry, but the overall crop production systems in the country. And with that, of course, the long term is to help achieve or advance the UN sustainability and developmental goals. With that, I would like to acknowledge the following, and I'd be happy to take any questions. I guess towards the end of the open forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lapones. Our next presenter earned his PhD in chemical engineering from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He is currently an instructor at the Department of Chemical Engineering, University of Santo Tomas. He will present the paper entitled Removal of Diesel Oil from Water Using Biochar Derived from Waste Banana Peels as Feedstock. Let us all welcome Dr. Edgar Clyde R. Lopez.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to thank the National Academy of Science and Technology for recognizing our work. And today I will be talking about one of our studies, so that was entitled Removal of Diesel Oil from Water Using Biochar Derived from Waste Banana Peel as an Adsorbent. So it's our mission to deliver practicable and scalable solutions that benefit our society through a more sustainable and resilient world. So this study was published in Carbon Research 2023. And when we're talking of oil spills, so I'm sure everyone here is familiar that it is a perennial problem in the Philippines. So in fact, a quick literature review revealed that from 2000 to 2001, there have been a lot of major oil spills that happened in the Philippines. And most of these devastating occurred annually. So these oil spills released enormous volumes of oil in water, and in fact the worst accident that happened in our country occurred in the Guimaras State, releasing around 2 million liters of diesel oil in water. So most of these oil spills occurred due to emergencies from capsizing vessels and incidental releases from manufacturing and industrial plants. So what is spilled to our environment? So it moves across our ecosystem and it moves around our different planetary boundaries, resulting in various environmental effects. So it can cause dispersion of oil across our maritime bodies, and what is spread, so it can cause bioaccumulation and even the release of volatile organic compounds in our atmosphere. So moreover, it heavily impacts our aquatic and marine organisms, sometimes resulting in biodiversity loss and eventual death of our marine organisms. So with that, it can also impact our human beings in various ways, such as physical health effects, economic effects such as loss of jobs, sociological effects, cultural effects, and most importantly, the psychological effect and the trauma brought to the families. So with that, there is a need for us to develop technologies and ways so that we can mitigate oil spill. So around the world, so there are a lot of technologies that are available and they can be put to use. So number one, so we have containment technologies that uses booms, skimmers, and dispersant. And once contained, there are also technologies to remove these diesel oil that have been scattered in our environment. And for our study, so we focus on developing a material that can remove this spilled oil from water. So the technology is very simple. So in fact, you have an oil absorbent. So you put that into affected marine environment, and then once the material is soaked, so the material can collect the oil, and then once we collect the absorbed material, so we can regenerate and recycle the diesel oil. So there's a need for us to develop a lot of material for oil spill mitigation. And one of the qualities of good oil spill absorbent should be low cost, renewable, and made of sustainable material. It should also be non-toxic, biodegradable, and it should require little to minimal input of energy. Moreover, so because we are talking of absorption, so it should have high absorption capacity and it should be easily regenerated. So with that, there are a lot of absorbent that have been studied in the literature. So we have rice husk absorbent, those absorbent from banana skin, potato peel, and even chitosan. So the problem with that is in the Philippines, so a quick search in the literature, we found out that there are little studies that focus on the use of absorbent for oil spill remediation. And because of that, so we focus on developing a material made from biomass that can remove oil from our water. So that comes our study in the form of banana peel. So you might be thinking, so why banana? So basically, we all know that banana is a major crop, and especially in the Philippines, so we produce 140 million tons annually. So about 1/3 of that banana peel are waste, generating 40 million tons of banana waste each year. So we found out from studies that this banana peel can be transformed to biochar through valorization. And this biochar has the ability to absorb diesel oil from water. So in our study, so we conducted an absorption experiment. So we transformed banana peels via pyrolysis method into banana peel biochar. And for our results, so we first investigated the characteristics of the banana peel biochar, and then afterwards we investigated the performance in absorbing diesel oil from water. So for our experiment, so we investigated a lot of parameters like absorbent dosing, pH, salinity, and contact time. So absorbent dosing, pH, and contact time are typically seen in absorption experiment, but what unique in our study is included the effect of salinity, because we all know that oil spills typically happen in marine environment. So here's the result of our characterization. So here we characterize the dry banana peel, showing its porous morphology, and it is rich in carbon content, as well as potassium and oxygen content. So when we pyrolyze the banana peel, and we converted it to biochar, and we can see that from the microscopic image, so it's highly porous, made of carbon and oxygen. And this, from our elemental analysis, we found out that the biochar is typically made of carbon. So that is consistent with biomass oil. And as you can see, so the second column is the banana peel, the third column is the biochar. So you can see that there is a decrease in carbon content. So that happened because of the release of gases byproducts such as carbon dioxide and methane. So potassium remains a dominant element, while other elements remain unchanged. So we also want to understand the surface chemistry of our biochar. So we conducted FTIR analysis, and we can see a shift in carbon-carbon double bond at around 1,610 per centimeter, suggesting unsaturated ketone structure. So we also found variation in carbon-oxygen stretching, indicating the modification of aromatic ester. So we also found peaks related to hydroxyl and carboxylic group in both samples, and additional signal due to the disappearance of methyl. So we also conducted thermal analysis in the form of differential scanning calorimetry, and we found shifts in transition temperature between the banana peel and the banana peel biochar. So as you can see here, the shift can be attributed to enhance crystallinity of the biochar after pyrolysis, and we also found that it's a thermodynamically stable material. So we also performed thermodynamic analysis and found that pyrolysis involves the breakdown of low molecular weight compounds, basically cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. So it has highly enhanced stability, leading to because of its lignin-rich composition. So we also performed BET analysis, and we revealed that the surface area is large, 3.65 meters per gram, and an average pore diameter of 36.30 nanometers. So as you can see here in the plot, we were able to find that the biochar has hierarchical pore structure consisting of micro, meso, and macropore. So this is very important in the context of absorption because it is the pores that are responsible for removing oil in water. So we also performed a diffraction analysis and found two general compositions, so which is the crystalline graphite and the turbostratic graphite. So confirming partial graphitization resulting from high temperature pyrolysis. And lastly, for our characterization, so we also conducted a contact angle test. So this is a very important property of an adsorbent for diesel oil removal because you want to have a hydrophobic material so that it can attract the diesel oil. So as you can see here, the average contact angle is around 98.45 degrees, confirming the hydrophobic structure of our material. So having said that, so because of all those interesting properties of our material, so we were able to assess the performance of biochar for removing diesel oil. So we were able to conduct response surface modeling and found a good model to model the behavior of diesel oil absorption in our biochar. So here's the final model equation showing high coefficient of determination, indicating that our experimental data fits well with our developed response surface model. So we want to investigate the effect of environmental conditions. So based on the graph, so increasing the dosage enhances the availability of the surface area and absorption site, thus enhancing the removal of diesel oil. So we are also able to determine maximum absorption performance at neutral condition. And we found out that increasing the salinity of our aquatic environment alters the surface chemistry, including charge, functional group, and electrostatic interaction. So, of course, increasing the contact time leads to enhanced torsion capacity due to increased diffusion and mass transfer phenomena. So, as you can see here, so this is the interaction plot of adsorbent dosage, contact time, initial pH, salinity, and contact time. So, these response surface contour plots show that the absorption of diesel oil in our biochar is very dynamic and is very contoured. So we performed optimization and model validation, and we found out that to obtain a very high absorption capacity, so we should include 2.5 grams of biochar, pH of 7, contact time of 240 minutes, and around 45,000 milligrams per liter of salinity. So we're able to obtain 5.34 grams per gram absorption capacity, which is very well within the predicted value of 5.6 grams per gram. So we also performed kinetic studies and found that our experimental data fits well with the pseudo first order kinetic model as shown by the high Rydberg value. And also, here are the plots of the first order kinetics at the different concentration. We also performed an isotherm study and found that the BET model best fits our adsorption data indicating multi-layer adsorption in which the diesel formed by monolayer molecules on the surface of our adsorbent with additional layers is stacked up. So there are no interaction between the adsorbent molecules. So comparison with other adsorbents in the literature reveal that our biochar outperformed common adsorbents that have been used for diesel oil removal. So we also characterize after adsorption. So we want to determine what happened. So here we found out that carbon-carbon double bond is actually between slurry and peak. And we observed additional peaks reflecting the presence of adsorbed diesel oil on the surface of our biochar. So both adsorption elemental analysis shown an increase in carbon content because of the increased diesel oil adsorption in our biochar. So this leads us to the adsorption mechanism. So basically adsorption happens in two-pronged approach. So it happens by absorption, where multi-layer adsorption occurs, and chemisorption because of the first-order model basically focusing on pi stacking, van der Waals forces, and electrostatic attraction. So this, what is the significance of this study? So basically, we were able to utilize biochar, convert it into a high-value material, and then utilize it for diesel oil removal. So this is a scalable and practical approach because it demonstrates the potential for large-scale implementation, especially in the Philippines. So to conclude our study, so basically we were able to comprehensively characterize our banana peel biochar, and we were able to assess the performance of our biochar, and this finding supports the biochar potential as a sustainable solution for oil spill remediation. So our impact transcends beyond the laboratory. So it promotes sustainable oil spill treatment through the use of agricultural waste and efficient absorption, protecting our aquatic environment. So currently, we are working with molecular simulation to further study the interaction between the diesel oil and our biochar. And also, we are working on developing engineering integration so that we can apply the biochar for actual remediation of oil spills in the market. So here we have a related work that was published last 2024 in which we incorporated the biochar in T-bags so that we can easily deploy that in our aquatic environment. So I would like to acknowledge my collaborator for this work. And with that, thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully you're able to learn something from my presentation.